You say we're live? Oh, yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first talk of Now Play This 2021. This, as you may have seen in the opening ceremony with Sebastian, today's theme is what do you need to have fun? So with the official selection and the events of the day, we're looking at projects that help us think about the infrastructures behind the way we play. And as part of this, we're really excited to have Nick Walker and Deborah Mensah-Bonsu with us from Space Ape Games, who have been doing some incredible work at their organization for creating for sorry everyone, for bringing the climate emergency into the work that they're doing and creating a better system to work along with. So Space Ape Games is a mobile studio based in London with several award-winning mobile games. I will hand over shortly to Nick and Deborah, but let's say a little bit about them first. So Nick Walker has been with Space Ape for 7 years and is primarily responsible for the infrastructure that runs their games and studio. He took on the responsibility for sustainability and climate 2 years ago. Deborah Mensah-Bonsu is founder of the DMB crew and its flagship initiative, Games for Good, which focuses on helping studios and industry harness games for social impact. She's a driving force behind the Green Mobile Game Jam, which reached more than 100 million gamers about climate change and consults for UN environments playing for the planet. Thank you both for joining us today. I guess I'll hand over to you. Would you like to share your screen?
Sure, I'll do that now and we'll get going. Hopefully you can see that okay. Holler if you can't. Debs, over to you.
Oh, it's me. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. Thanks to everyone for watching. And thanks so much as well for that really nice introduction. I feel like I don't need to say much more about myself now. But yeah, I guess a little bit about me. I was with Space Ape for 5 years, heading up their content. And in the last maybe like 3 years of my time at the company, I started to push social good initiatives within the studio. So whether that was around education and mentoring, or partnerships with charities, or our social justice causes, or also sustainability efforts. So I kind of realized maybe a year ago, maybe a bit longer, that that was kind of all that I wanted to do. I think once you get the bug of trying to do good through games, it's kind of, yeah, it's a bit, I don't know, I'm rambling now. It's all you want to do basically. But so I started my own consultancy to focus on that last summer. And so now I, like Nick was saying, I help studios leverage their games, their studios themselves, and also their players for social impact. And I still consult for Space Ape as well. And so I have the pleasure of working with Nick still, who is lovely. And he's going to tell you more about himself.
Yeah, hi, thanks for coming to watch. I'm Nick. I work for Space Ape Games, where from that photo and from Nick's introduction as well, you might be able to guess that I'm in technology. I look after our technology teams running and operating our gaming studio. And I have been working on our sustainability efforts at the studio since 2019. Just to give you some context about Space Ape Games on top of what Nick already said, we're about 120 people. We make games that millions of people play on their phones and tablets from anywhere in the world. We were founded in 2012. We've got 4 titles out there now and a whole host in development, including one in soft launch right now that we're very excited about, called Beatstar. So today we thought it would be interesting to talk a bit about climate change and how Space Ape Games thinks of its role in addressing this crisis. There's a few things that would be good to share, and they kind of represent these 2 big components to how the games industry might promote sustainability. The first is, how can we run and operate our studios in a sustainable manner? Like, how can we own the emissions we're responsible for? And the second is there a way we can use our games or the mass player, like the mass power of all our players, to do something good for the planet? Because I am very, very excited by the process and the technology of how studios can go carbon neutral, I'm going to talk to you a bit about that. And then, because she's an unrelenting beacon of optimism and faith in the future, Deborah is going to talk to you about one way we're encouraging game studios to consciously create ways for their games to make the world a better place. So into the nitty-gritty. Space Ape's journey starts with a little bit of a cheat. And it starts with a cheat because around this time in 2019, John, our CEO, stood up and told the company that we'd be going carbon neutral. And it was a cheat because we didn't have to convince John. There was no difficult and intractable situation where a growing body of colleagues were lobbying for us to do something about the climate. That was easy. John just stood up and said, we're doing it. It's important to note here that to do anything around sustainability, you really need that buy-in from the top of the business. Like, these bottom-up efforts will always be stymied because they require both time and money. And you can kind of shortcut the time, but you can't avoid it costing money. So with this buy-in, we assembled a strike force of just a few colleagues and set about working out what it is that we wanted to do. We knew that we wanted to go carbon neutral, but was there anything else that we could do along the way? Now, right around this time, Deborah here had extended an invite, as she does, to a chap from the UN to come talk to us. And this changed our approach quite dramatically. This chap was from the UN Environment Programme out of Nairobi and was fishing around for game studios to join a nascent group called the Playing for the Planet Alliance. And as part of this, companies as diverse as Sony, Microsoft, Ubisoft, and little old Space Ape were called upon to make commitments to sustainability. And because of the nature of this, like the UN and working with all these big players in the industry, we felt like we could kind of stretch ourselves with our commitments. And we did. And these commitments we ended up making in our first year, that we would measure our studio's carbon footprint and offset 200% of that. And we'd also measure the emissions from our players' devices while they were playing our games and offset that. And we'd also reduce our studio's footprint in 2020 by 10%. And there was a few other things we committed to as well. Like, for example, we open sourced our data to perhaps help people see how we've done it, make it easier for the folk who came next, give them a leg up, I guess. As a group, the Playing for the Planet Alliance all ended up taking this stuff to a UN press conference, like right in the middle of the UN General Assembly week in New York. It was a chaotic, crazy time. And the lesson for us here wasn't to hope for a lucky meeting with a mover and a shaker from the UN, but rather it's about setting some commitments, either in your professional life or even in your personal life, if you want to do this just as a solo person, and be loud about those commitments. It's a bit like when you try and give up smoking or lose weight. You're way more likely to be successful if you state your intentions up front, particularly to your friends, or in our case, industry friends. So we've made some commitments, we're energized. Now all we had to do was achieve them. But most worryingly, we had pretty much no idea like how to take the studio carbon neutral, what it really entailed. But now we do know, and I can tell you follow a pretty simple process. There's quite a bit of help out there, and most of the help points you down this route. Define, measure, offset, mitigate. And it's a cycle. You kind of do it yearly, starting with number 1, 2, 3, and then you go back to one every year. So right now I'm about to embark on 2020's greenhouse gas emissions, and we're going to start looking at defining our carbon footprint again. And the route we took at Space Ape was to solo this, to go it alone. We didn't need any help. We're just going to learn it all. We decided, like if you take my weight loss analogy, we decided to learn about nutrition and metabolism first before we decided to cut any calories. You don't have to go this route. Like if you're a small game studio, like a few folk, or if you're an individual even, you could look at using simple carbon calculator and just starting there until you have the resources to bite off more. Even if you're a larger group or a bigger company, you might not have people to dedicate to the task. you can reach out to some consultancies out there. They will happily guide you through the process, give you a hand-holding that you need to know that you're on the right path. There's still work to do there, mind you. It's a bit like, you know, when you have an accountant, they'll still want you to like hand over receipts and tell them what you spent the money on and stuff. So whichever option you end up on, the process is still pretty similar. And I'll talk briefly about what we did in these stages, because at least to me, it's kind of interesting to see how the sausage is made. And I guess like, it's good to know what people mean when they say, well, they're talking about offsetting and measuring things. Like, what are they measuring? Like, how are they doing that? What's all this about? So the journey starts with defining what it is that you want to encompass your carbon footprint. And when we define or scope our carbon footprint, what we're doing is picking the boundaries of what we want to be responsible for. They're kind of flexible. Like, so long as you're clear about what it is that you're taking ownership of. Our approach was to roughly follow like a set of guidelines laid out by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. They're just like standards and compliance organization. A lot of people follow these guidelines. And our ambition here, and maybe a learning to share, is that you can kind of start by following a standard like the Greenhouse Gas Protocols, and then like expand your scope, tighten your compliance with it almost over time to give an ever better view, an ever more accurate view of your carbon emissions year on year. You can see there are 3 groupings on the slide. There's this scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. These are like terminologies that the Greenhouse Gas Protocols use. They're not, I won't go into too much detail, but like scope 1 and 2 are pretty easy. Like scope 1 is like, if you directly burn stuff and emit carbon emissions as a result of burning it, that's scope 1. So like if you have gas heating, or if you have a fleet of cars that are burning petrol, that's scope 1. Scope 2 is indirect emissions. So things like when you're buying power, you have plugging in your electrics, the emissions from the power station, that's your responsibility as well in scope 2. And scope 3 is everything else, and it is quite the slippery slope. It could be like, flights that you take as part of your business. It could be things you bought, things you throw away, the people supplying you, the people you're supplying, like it's a whole thing. We did a bunch of looking around to see what other people had done, and we spoke to colleagues in the industry, and we ultimately ended up with a list a bit like this. Top left there is our gas heating from scope 1 and the electricity from scope 2 on the top right. And then this scope 3 is like wastewater. Like, what's the carbon footprint of wastewater? Deliveries, like how many times people rock up to the office with boxes of things for us, the things we bought, like the things inside those boxes. What's the carbon footprint of all the laptops we bought? Commutes in and out of the office, all the people we have working for us that are remote, everything you can imagine. So much in there. So having considered which of these things were appropriate, and we think this is all the things that are appropriate, we moved on to the next phase, which is measuring. Okay, so I know this looks like an equation, and yes, I'm showing you maths, and I know this is an art festival. I don't have any defense other than I feel like it's a kind of an important bit of maths. Like, it's the equation that gets us from the stuff we use to the stuff we emitted. And here's how it works. Let's say we talk to the nice people that run our office and ask them how much electricity that we used last year. And they might come back and say, well, your electricity bill says you used 100,000 kilowatt hours of energy, which isn't too far from the truth in, let's say, 2018. To turn that into a carbon emission, we would need something called an emissions factor. Now, this is the number that represents the carbon emissions for each kilowatt hour, in this case of electricity in the UK. And an emissions factor seems like it'd be like a pretty tricky thing to dig up, but the UK government, of all people, publish emissions factors for all sorts of things like electricity or transport. You can get the emissions factor of a kilometer journey on light rail, like the DLR, or a hotel stay in like a whole bunch of countries around the world. It's really neat. So you can imagine you take this sum and you have all these different things from that last slide, like flights and hotel stays, and it can get pretty gnarly, is what I'm trying to say. This phase very quickly becomes all about spreadsheets, absolutely tons of spreadsheets. So we spent time populating these spreadsheets with all the raw data from water use to airline flights, hotel stays. Sometimes, because we're a small business, we outsource a lot of things. We needed help from those people we outsource to, our partners, our suppliers, to help us work this out. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's easy, and they're ready. So a lot of companies aren't ready for you to ask them, what's the carbon footprint of this stuff that you deliver to us, In the end, you'll have this mega spreadsheet where you've done a bunch of sums and you come up with your carbon footprint. And for us in 2018, it looked like this. This is a high-level view. There's a lot more detail we can get into. You can see, for example, the cloud there, the servers running our games, running the development games, running a lot of our business operations, take up a huge chunk there. But that's kind of what you'd expect. It's a lot of what we do. It's almost everything that we do, really. Flights take up a fair chunk as well, as well, this is 2018. We used to fly around the world to events now and again. So by the time you've gotten here, you'll have had to make a bunch of decisions whilst you were like neck deep in these calculations. For example, which purchases do you include? Or how can we estimate the carbon cost of a Dell laptop? And for this, you need to get really comfortable with estimating. Like there's lots and lots of estimates in carbon accounting. The best way to sleep at night is to make sure that you estimate really, really pessimistically. That's what we did. We'd round up, we'd assume the worst. And through doing that, we feel pretty confident we're not under measuring any of this stuff, because that's what we really didn't want to do. All right, offsetting. So common practice is that once you measure your carbon footprint to be carbon neutral, you need to purchase what are called carbon offsets. They essentially pay off your carbon footprint. And there is absolutely a take on carbon offsets, which frames them a bit like papal indulgences. Burn as much fuel as you like. Be frivolous with your carbon footprint. For like a few dollars a ton, you can simply declare yourself carbon neutral, get on with your business. But the reality is much more complex. And I found that whilst carbon offsets are a necessary evil to like find carbon neutrality, I don't consider them sufficient to absolve our climate sins. So carbon offsets, you pay money ultimately to a project that promises to remove or otherwise not emit carbon dioxide that would otherwise have been emitted. And the project might be something like clean cook stoves in Bangladesh, or it might be a hydropower project in China, or a biogas plant in the USA. There are a lot of projects out there claiming to somehow, some way have reduced CO2 emissions. And it is definitely a challenge to work out which of these projects are kind of legitimate and which are not. What we're really looking for are high quality offsets, preferably accredited somehow. Thankfully, there's a market for these. There's a few bodies doing accreditation. Verra and Gold Standard are two of the biggest players in the market here, in the voluntary carbon offset market. And they work with projects themselves and have a series of public, pretty standardized documents, which help you understand why the project thinks it's able to claim that carbon offset. You can really dig into the deal. These are all publicly available. You can go there. You don't need to buy an offset to have them. You can go there now. You can dig them out and you can start looking and sort of see these very big Word documents which kind of explore how a given project can sort of account for its carbon reduction. I'd say regardless of all these documents, you want to find a broker for buying carbon offsets. Even with Verra and Gold Standard, there's too much to choose from. We used a broker to help us. They narrowed a selection based on our requirements, and we ended up with a range of options like $8 to $13 a ton, something like that. Your broker will also retire those carbon credits for you, something you have to do. Otherwise, you can actually resell these. They're a bit of a financial instrument. So when you retire them, they're no longer exchangeable for money or other things. So, you know, there's supposed to be a proper accounting for you know, the carbon credit that you bought. So the last step is all about reduction. And I think it's the most important step. Like, it's the one that most folk, I think, spend maybe the least time on because it's also the hardest. As I said, it's easy to pay money to make the problem of your carbon footprint disappear, but carbon credits don't make your emissions vanish. You still emitted all that carbon dioxide. It would be great if you emitted less. So I'll tell you what we did first, and then maybe tell you what it is that we need to be doing. So if you remember back to the beginning, I said we'd cull 10% off of our carbon footprint in 2020. That was our 2019 commitment. And the aim there was to work initially with our landlord to switch our office electricity supply to a renewable provider. That would cover 8% of that 10%. And then the other 2%, I think we'd find through pretty modest cuts to either our cloud footprint or our flights. And then COVID happened, and I'm pretty sure we saved a lot more than 10%. We didn't fly anywhere last year. We had another bunch of stuff we actioned in 2019 as well. Like, we made our catered lunches we occasionally would get in the office. We made those vegetarian. We thought not using meat as much would help. We went through our grocery shopping to reduce the amount of plastic wrap things that were coming in, find sustainable options if any were available. But I'll be honest, these are the kinds of things, they're not like big impact. They're very local. We're a small company, we're 120 people. We're not gonna, change the world. So within this step, this mitigation step, there are things that are easy to do that have low impact. And there are harder things to do that have great impact. You can see it in this graphic. It's easy to move your company to be meat-free or to provide reusable coffee cups, which is something we do. If you need to go out to a coffee shop, you just grab one of the coffee cups and you take it with you. But it's limited in its impact. It's probably easy as well to switch to renewables, but we did that, and it's not that hard. But the harder stuff is at the top right, is what I'm trying to say, like making your games run more efficiently, or moving everything to a cloud that's run on renewables, or there are some tough things that you could choose to do. Our experience is that it'll feel comfortable to do lots of little things and feel like you're doing something good. And I say, yeah, do those little things. Make your company meals vegetarian. Get your office running on renewables. Like, help people in your business act the way you want to see the whole world act. But understand that your impact on carbon emissions at the bottom of the graphic there is limited. It's not terribly measurable either. I think the truth is that we face a pretty grievous challenge on Earth to collectively cut our emissions year on year on year, and to build and operate businesses sustainably whilst we're trying to do that. And that's going to force some hard decisions. Thinking back to what I said at the head of all this about needing buy-in from leadership, well, this is where it matters, because to seriously take a stab at reducing your emissions where it counts is going to need passionate, caring leadership. Nobody else is going to be able to tell the business, stop flying so much, please. Or, hey, we need to switch cloud provider to one that's green. Or pivot a product, of all things, your product, your games, to be less damaging to the environment. I'll talk a bit at the tail end of this after Deb's spoken about some of the things we're looking at to move us to the top right of this graph and how to further mitigate the impact that we have on the planet. But there's another thing at the top of this graphic, at the top right, in that sweet spot of big benefit and big achievement. Big achievement, how hard it is to achieve. For example, like, what if as an industry we could do something that was pretty hard, had a big benefit? How could we help 2 billion players understand sustainability, or change their behaviors, or contribute to projects that are good for the planet? To talk a bit about one of the ways we in the industry are trying to address that, Debs is going to come back and talk about the 2021 Green Game Jam.
Thanks so much, Nick. It's always great to hear. I feel like every time I hear you talk about it, I learn something else, so it's great. So Nick already told you a little bit about the Playing for the Planet Alliance. I believe right now we've got about 30 members, and we've also just started something called associate membership for things like trade bodies. So actually Yuki and Games London just announced their membership today. So that is really exciting as well. So the Green Game Jam, one of the initiatives that came out of the Playing for the Planet Alliance last year was the Jam. And last year it was spearheaded by Space Ape. So basically off the back of those commitments at the UN summit that Nick was talking about in New York, everybody was kind of really jazzed and excited about what could be possible within the industry after that. So there were a few of us that were sitting around in Space Ape's boardroom off the back of that summit. And we thought, what can we do to further rally the industry around this cause? And then our CEO, John, said, well, what about a game jam? Like, we're all really competitive. The industry will love that kind of thing. It gets out creativity, but also because of that competitive edge, it'll probably push the boundaries a little bit. So we thought, great, we will do a game jam. We ended up doing it with 11 mobile studios, and we did mobile only because we were really trying to proof point the concept last year to see whether these companies would play together really, and whether we could pull it off. And originally it was supposed to be a 2-day game jam, the way that game jams often run, but then the pandemic hit. And so that 2 days turned into 3 months while everybody was kind of adjusting to the new normal. But everybody still did deliver, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So really the point of the Game Jam is to empower our players to change their world through the games that they know and love. So really our reach is unprecedented within the games industry. Like Nick mentioned before, you know, there's more than 2 billion people that play, I think, mobile alone. So we're also in a really privileged position, because while there are so many industries that are really suffering, like ours is thriving. So I think with that also comes you know, an opportunity and maybe even a responsibility to try to do something with that influence. And you know, games are the main form of entertainment now, bigger than music and movies combined. And so we have this opportunity to reach people the same way that you would with books or film or TV, right? And so really what we have in the games industry, if you are a game maker, we have like 2 of the most valuable things that anybody can give you. We have players' time, and because we have their time, it also shows us that we have their trust. You're not going to spend a bunch of time with somebody that you don't trust, and those 2 things are really powerful. Like that relationship can be really powerful. And so this is where I'll chat a little bit about why this jam is different to maybe other game jams. And I know there are people joining who may not be strictly from the games industry, but usually a game jam, like I said, is like a condensed period of time, maybe 2 days, where you get together with a small team and you try to prototype a new game, a new feature. And then it's possible that that game might see the light of day at some point, or you've just come up with some really great ideas and maybe that will inspire you in different directions. And while we love game jams in the way that we know them or have known them so far, what we really thought was that, well, actually, you know, we're amongst all of these incredible game makers who have games that are already out there. They're alive in the world. They have millions of players that know them and love them. So why don't we try to reach the player base that we already have, rather than trying to create something from scratch, hope that it goes live one day, and then hope that people like it and that it's successful enough to make a difference. So that is where the Green Game Jam is a bit different, because we're using titles with existing audiences and trying to use or trying to reach those audiences. And really, like the whole discussion of climate change, I think, can be quite overwhelming. I think we all know that, you know, there's a lot of fear tactics out there, or sometimes people think, oh, people just don't care enough, and that's why people aren't trying to help. When really, I think it's more about people just not really being empowered to make a difference. Like if they don't have the tools, or if you don't know how to help, you're just kind of going to feel paralyzed and you're not going to be able to really contribute. And really also these days, like every company has some kind of sustainability claim. It's almost like you can't exist as a brand or a company these days without making some kind of claim. And people don't really buy that anymore. I think people have really wisened up to, you know, to how companies do business. And they don't really need companies to be the hero anymore. So we're in like the Greta Thunberg generation now. And there's a great book about this as well called The Hero Trap by Thomas Kolster. I suggest that you check it out if you're working in any kind of marketing or advertising space or in sustainability. But it's really more now about how people can make the change themselves. You know, they want to be the people to save. They don't need companies to save them anymore. They want to be the change makers themselves. So the practicalities of the jam, I'll talk about that a little bit. Like I said, it's 2 days over the span of 3 months. So however people want to divide their time within those 3 months is up to them. They'll choose a game, one of their titles. They're going to tweak that game. So brainstorm and prototype ways that they can incorporate what we call green nudges or green activations into that game. And then through that, empower their players to either change their behaviors, to learn, to take an action, to try to mitigate climate change. And this year, we're going to be reaching and teaching our players about oceans and forests, but I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. One more thing that I think is really important about the jam, we thought that, like I said, you know, this spirit of competition would really fuel the best ideas. But what we really found was that it was the spirit of collaboration that really like solidified the ideas and brought out the best in the teams. I think as an industry, like we play really, really well together, and we should be doing that more often because we can learn from each other. We can find best practices together, especially with something, you know, like I said, overwhelming, like climate change. Like we need to be helping each other through this stuff. And so based on that concept, last year, through that model, we were able to reach more than 100 million gamers, and we had different objectives or different themes that we were trying to tackle. One was around reforestation, one around renewable energy, and then the last one was around individual behaviors that we could potentially help players tweak. So whether that was around the food that they were consuming, the way that they were commuting, or even things like the clothes that they were wearing, right? So things like fast fashion, for example. And we had lots of different activations come out of the jam around tree planting initiatives and fundraising efforts for wildlife. At Space Ape, we did something around renewable energy. We created a new storyline, a new campaign, added a new building that was solar powered to the game as well. And we did a little piece of citizen science to poll our players about the different kinds of renewable energy sources that were available in their areas, because that data was actually lacking with the renewable energy organization that we partnered with to do that survey. And so this year, we've added platforms to the jam, i.e. we're not just mobile anymore. Now there's also console and PC, and we've got more than double the teams that we did last year. And so with that in mind, I mean, you may not, you know, when you see all those different company names, you might not immediately associate them with the games, but like these are some of the most popular and most loved games out there, right? Things like Minecraft and Pokemon Go, Angry Birds. So these different titles have all decided to participate in the jam. And because of that, we are hoping to this year reach 1 billion gamers rather than 1 million. And like I said before, the theme this year is around forests and oceans, conservation and restoration of forests on land and in the water is what we're calling it. And so why forests and oceans? Some sad stats here, but it will get more positive, but some sad things, you know, 30 soccer fields of forests are lost every minute, and 20% of the Amazon is already lost forever, never coming back. If we did take care of our forests, they would account for about 1/4 of our emission reductions, which is good news. 1.6 billion people rely on forests for their income. They also make up 80% of the world's biodiversity, and they shield against zoonotic diseases like COVID, for example. And then when we're looking at oceans, we're focusing on coral and mangroves and seagrass, which are also great carbon sinks. And unfortunately, coral, half of it is already gone. It's already died off by 50%. And it's sad because coral we call the rainforest of the ocean, actually, in case people didn't know that. Oceans in general are home to 250 million marine species, and oceans provide food for 1 billion people. And the last thing is that, you know, oceans are actually severely underfunded. We need about 7 times the funding for oceans than we're currently getting. So I said before that we are trying to reach 1 billion people, and there's a bit like a cascading, I guess, ladder of impact that we're working with here. So we're trying to reach 1 billion. We want to engage 100 million through play. So that's things like events or maps and modes or new storylines, skins, characters. And then we want to convert 10 million players into action. So we've got 2 pledge campaigns that we're setting up. One is called Play for Forests, and the other one is Glowing, Glowing, Gone. One's for forests and one's for oceans. And we're hoping to get 10 million signatures, which we will then take to COP26 in November and present to world leaders. And on top of that, if companies want to do their part, we're also offering studios to offset their emissions through 2 different programs. One is called the Green Gigaton Challenge, and the other is called the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. So before I said that, you know, we want to track these measurable actions. So we want 10 million signatures, or we're trying to raise X amount of money. But really, like, it goes a lot deeper than that. And there's a lot of I guess, impact that these kinds of things will drive that are a lot harder to measure, because we're trying to change, attitudes. We're trying to affect hearts and minds when it comes to climate change and sustainability. And so that takes longer, like to see the effect of that or even measure the effect of that takes longer. So we've also kicked off a research project in parallel with the Game Jam, where we're going to be trying to track player attitudes towards these different themes over a year's time. And so lastly, it's really great. You've empowered your players, assuming that you've gone through these different steps. Players feel like heroes. They're making a difference. They feel empowered, amazing. But it's really important to think about whether you're also, walking the walk. Are you backing up what you're trying to get your players to do with your own actions as a business? So it's really important also to think about the way that your company is reflecting some of those things that you're pushing onto your players. And so Nick's talked about how Space Ape went carbon neutral, and now he's going to talk a little bit about what's next and how you can push that agenda further as a business as well.
Thanks, Debs. It just struck me, this is only year 2 of this project. This is the second year that the Green Game Jam has run, and the scope and size and potential reach for this is just incredible. It's so cool. Thanks very much. So
thank you.
There is, as you've heard, tons we could be doing, like across the board in the industry, whether it's like decarbonising our studios and our activities, or trying to use our games for good through things like the Green Game Jam and beyond. So what's in our future at Space Ape? Well, our next steps are just to iterate on what we've been doing. We know we're not perfect. We want to be better each consecutive year. We want to fix any mistakes we've made. We want to carry on sharing. Here's a little bit of what's on our plate right now, some of which I hope to make happen in 2021. So this is, I bet you didn't think you'd be reading about fidelity on carbon accounting tonight. So when you do carbon accounting, you kind of, as I said, you kind of pick your scope. But what if we made a mistake in our scope? What if there was a bit of something that we did as a business that had a huge carbon impact, but we didn't know about it? Or we kind of thought it might be bad, but we didn't measure it, or there are no emissions factors for it. That keeps me up at night. There's this fear of finding an iceberg type event. So in the spirit of making things better each year, I'm hoping to hunt down this year some decent numbers, for example, on the impact of the internet on delivering our games, like all those routers that sit between the cloud that we own and operate and we know about, and the players on the other end of a Wi-Fi connection. What about the carbon impact of that? Or on our advertising, we buy adverts all around the internet to say, hey, here's our game. What's the carbon footprint of that? With any luck, I can add this to our carbon footprint in one of the coming years. I hope to start work on that pretty soon, but it's a complex one, and it relies on many other people to play ball with us. Carbon negative emissions purchases, these are different to carbon offsets. We've been following Stripe, if you know them, the payment companies work in sustainability with real interest. They're a big inspiration. And I really recommend looking at their blog posts on the topics. They've spent a lot of effort recently understanding some new businesses that are trying to scale carbon removal technology. This is kind of cutting edge future stuff where you have plants removing, not trees, but like industrial plants removing carbon from the atmosphere using this new kinds of technology, whether it's like adding carbon dioxide to water, pumping it deep down into rock, or there's all sorts of different technologies behind it. But it's very new. It's extremely expensive. As an offset, you're looking at like £100 a ton, not $10 a ton. But it's a real honest to good accounting. Like it's like genuinely removing carbon. So like maybe does that genuinely absolve us of our carbon footprint? Maybe. Forestry and tree planting, Deb's touched on some of this. This is similar to carbon negative offsets. It's a really hot topic right now. Like you can't go a week without another sort of tree planting headline or some huge number of trees being planted. Historically, though, there's been a pretty spotty record for forestry offsets where they've struggled to show long-term carbon offsetting. A lot of tree planting is monoculture, right? So they just plant the same tree, and I don't think it's going to last all that long. It has to last a long time to really offset carbon. The UN is helping a lot here, particularly around forestry offsets with standing forests, already existing forests. There are some modern technologies, think, photographing forests from the air with drones or satellites, standards that have come along built on this technology that give us more confidence in forestry-related offsets. So as part of the UN Green Gigaton Challenge, we're going to spend some of our offset-related activity this year. We're going to invest in some of these accredited offsets this year. One area I'm really keen to look at is helping the folk that work at Space Ape offset their personal carbon footprints. Now, I feel like maybe we have an ethical obligation to do this. Like, after all, it's like the sort of success of the business then goes to paying people that then spend that money on carbon emitting activities. Maybe we have an ethical consideration in this. I don't know, maybe this becomes a perk that we offer everyone here, or maybe we offset people's summer holiday flights, or we open up our funds so that people can offset, and we make it easy for folks to offset their personal carbon footprints. It's definitely a work in progress, but I feel like it could be really nice to include that as a benefit of being part of the Space Ape family. And finally, so we've been sharing our approach bit by bit with studios who are just learning about this, and other folk who are interested in knowing more of the nitty gritty. And we figured it might be a nice time to mention that if you're interested, we're going to roll out a little workshop in April. Look, we've even got a logo for it, thanks to Jay at Space Ape for putting this together at super short notice. He's a hero. We'll drop a link into chat very soon in case anyone's interested. The aim of the session is going to be a bit more of a deep dive into this stuff, help you understand this way of approaching sustainability. We'll cover some of the pitfalls, loads of stuff about spreadsheets and more maths and things about estimating and how to handle that uncertainty I talked about. Hopefully, we'll also be able to share some resources with you on how to either continue your journey in sustainability or maybe even kick off your own sustainability roadmap. Look forward to that. Link should be in chat pretty soon. And with that, that's it. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Now Play This as well. Hope you all have a wonderful festival. If anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to take them. I'll stop screen sharing.
Thank you both. That was incredible. Like, it's really amazing to see what goes into this work. Like, I guess from the get-go, you don't see that many companies who can proudly say that they've gone, carbon neutral, if not carbon negative, the way that you have. And to see the kind of nuts and bolts that goes into that is really, well, it's very inspiring. I have some questions. And then, but yes, if you are in the chat on Twitch, please do pop some questions in, and we will get to those too. We've got a little bit of time for that. Jumping right back to the beginning, you mentioned about the mass power of your players, and that's kind of come up in various different ways through like the jam itself and having them be this kind of critical mass that can have change. All the way to when you were talking about how you can measure their contribution to this. Up till now, how have you done that? How have you factored in your players to the carbon footprint that the company has?
So right now we measure the players' energy use. So we know how long players play our games for because they have to connect to our servers. So we have these events that tell us when they begin and end their game. And so we know that, we might have 100 million or 1 billion hours played across the world. And we also know which country they played in. So what we did was we took the energy use of an average smartphone, and here you'll understand estimates are a big part of carbon footprinting. We took those numbers and we just multiplied them together. So we would take the energy use in the country that the person was in. Let's say they're in Japan. We'd look up the average CO2, the CO2 produced by a kilowatt hour, let's say. And we know how much. So we multiply it all together, and we do that again, massive spreadsheets. So we take the energy use of the player in the country there and multiply it all together, and we get this pretty big number. One thing that's very interesting about this, I think, is that this scales up and down with the success of our games. So we have been working on new games for quite a while now. We've got some, as I said, in soft launch and coming in the future. And the games that are out there now are are kind of just, they're engaging a certain number of players, but not as many as, when you first launch a game, you get loads and loads of fresh players. And our carbon footprint is going to go up as a result of that. So we're going to have to account for that. We're going to have to think of ways to say, well, our carbon footprint per million player hours is low. Find ways to find efficiencies without sacrificing player experience. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time as we launch these new games.
Cool. I'm going to jump into some of our audience questions because some really, really amazing questions have come in already. So from Kiko V on the Twitch chat, I'm curious if the nudges discussed in the Playing for the Planet publication influenced the way you've been designing mechanics in games. Do you re-evaluate goals and mechanics in your games based on if they contradict sustainable nudges?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think because we're still quite new at, okay, let me start over. There's a lot of games that are trying to focus explicitly on this subject matter, right? Like there are a lot of different games out there that are trying to educate or to focus just on sustainability or wildlife or ecosystems, etc. But it's still newer to incorporate that kind of messaging within the everyday game. So I think something that we're trying to do with the Jam as well is figure out, like I said, what kind of impact are these different activations having? And one thing that we're rolling out is this sort of survey for players so that we can figure out what their attitudes are now towards these themes about climate change, sustainability, and then how those might change over time as we incorporate these different elements into games, because then we can also find out more about our audiences, right? And say, okay, they really care about, for example, forests, or they love engaging with oceans, or they're really keen on renewable energy. And you can start to tailor your content towards your audience better so that you can also reach and teach them in like a way that's more tailored to them, rather than just kind of, spray and praying, yeah. to use a games term. So that's something that we're looking at now. So it's a really, really good question, because it is still rather new that we're sort of trying to implement the stuff in like mass titles and games that everybody's playing now, rather than creating content expressly for sustainability or for education. So
cool.
I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I think that's a brilliant answer. I have another one. Another user on Twitch is interested in the citizen science tie-in for the Jam last year. Was that organized at the Jam level, or did an individual project incorporate that into their game? And what did it look like? So that was Space Apes. It was not done at the Jam level. What we did last year, because our game Transformers Earth Wars fit really nicely with the Jam theme of renewable energy, because actually, a little bit of backstory, the Transformers, they used to live on their planet, which unfortunately got ruined, destroyed, ravaged, because they were using their resources in an unsustainable way. So they come down to Earth, and Earth is at risk of suffering the same fate. And so we incorporated that storyline was already there. And so we managed to bring in a new storyline about renewable energy and solar power into the game that way, which was kind of seamless. And then we were working with a renewable energy organization called REN21, because we wanted to ask them what kind of activation might be like useful for them, or what might be impactful. And what they said actually was that they were missing data on the kinds of renewable energy sources that were available in different parts of the world, and that was a frustration on their end, because we were saying, we can send you players, and they're like, we don't know what to do with them because we are lacking data in this space. And so we thought, okay, well, maybe we can help with that. And citizen science is really trying to, use your citizens, right, to collect like large data points. And so we ended up collecting like 13,000 surveys from our players about renewable energy options that were available in their area. So that's how we tackled that. Cool. I've got one more in the chat. And this is very much back to the studio as it operates. What's your approach to computer hardware? Are refurbished machines viable for game studios? What's the lifespan of equipment? And does the right to repair come into this at all?
That's a really good shout. So we, I mean, primarily we are lucky enough to use Apple hardware for most of our personnel equipment. Like so, you know, most people have an Apple laptop. One of the things I really like about Apple is they are pretty transparent about their ecological impact, their sustainability. They are one of the very few tech providers out there who provide a carbon footprint for their hardware. So we actually can know what the carbon footprint of the laptops we buy are. When we bought laptops for other users who prefer different hardware, we found it very difficult to find a good accounting for that. So that is a benefit that we've really enjoyed of using Apple hardware. However, if you've ever used Unity with any reasonably sized project, you will be familiar with the fact that it is very demanding on hardware. And so we typically need fast machines to do that. But we've managed, I think I would say, my IT team are going to kill me if I get this wrong, but maybe, I think it's like 4+ years we're at now. So I think we're just retiring things from 2018 era. So we don't have any of the older MacBooks, for example, the pre-monobody ones. But these are interesting discussions, particularly around the right to repair. These are difficult to repair. I'm not going to lie, these are, but also they are recyclable in a way. I think like Apple puts a lot of effort into making them recyclable, and we dispose of them sustainably in the sense they go to recycling centers. You don't just like toss them out with the food and the and the plastics. They go to proper as it's called, like recycling centers.
Cool. So I've got one more that I think hopefully this is kind of useful across the board for all our viewers. You during the talk, you had several moments where you had graphs of kind of hard to do, kind of big impact. And I was wondering how scalable a lot of that stuff is. Like, what would be your advice in the first kind of 3 things to do that fit on that graph for a studio of maybe 4 people? And kind of how different is that to the first couple of things that a huge studio should do? Like, where would you start as a kind of smaller organization?
That's a really good shout. I think the process is kind of the same no matter what. So the challenge is, in order to mitigate, in order to know what on that graph you have that's the lowest hanging fruit, you need to measure first. So you need to know, oh, hey, like we use 100,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. Or, it turns out buying laptops is, very, very bad for the environment. So we should maybe not do that so much. So you need to do the measuring first, and then you mitigate at the end. And there's a lot of people that have this a different way around, where you mitigate first as much as you can, and then you offset. But in your first year, you actually need to measure everything first, get an understanding of where everything on the graph sits, and identify those low-hanging fruit. I would say I'd be really surprised if, for a small business, if you're high tech, it's probably the cloud. If you're running stuff in the cloud, or you're using a lot of cloud services, particularly outside of the Google ecosystem, Google is already like offset, so they try to be carbon neutral with all of their data centers. So if you're using that stuff, you're probably all right. Your electricity bill, your flights. If you fly around a lot, like the flights can eat up your carbon footprint so quickly that it's devastating, devastatingly fast how that happens. I would say for small studios, you'd be looking at the electricity bill. Flights almost certainly exceed the electricity bill, and the cloud. If you're using a cloud that's not already doing something about sustainability, you might be surprised how much that is. And it's also very, very difficult to get that data. So you'll have to kind of guess.
Cool. Kind of leading on from that, from kind of the work you've done over the year, and also from the jam, did you sorry, I've just seen in the chat that someone just noticed there was a cat. So
there is a cat. Hugo.
Leading on from that.
My little baby, my Hugo. Yeah, he was sleeping and now he's awake.
Yeah. Through both the work you've done over the year and from the jam, were there particular things that you noticed that your players responded to and then made changes for themselves? that you would share for our audience watching here, who could kind of make some of these changes too? Like what really kind of stuck out as things that players kind of really responded to and maybe made their changes on?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think some things that we saw that worked really well were things like reducing the friction to try to take an action. So for example, even if it's something like fundraising or you're trying to plant trees, if you can incorporate that into your game and make it sync with your game, so that maybe something you're doing within the game also has to do with growing trees, planting trees, and then you can sort of transpose that action to the real world and then have them plant trees in the real world. That kind of thing works really well because you're already taking the action. So if you can just duplicate it outside the game, or if there's like a one button click that you can take, so that you will take that action outside the game and then you can see the impact of that in the real world. Like those kinds of things are really powerful. And I think also like when companies and their players partner on something together. So I don't know if some of you might have seen Alba, for example, where for every game that's downloaded, they plant a tree, and they're also growing like you're protecting wildlife within the game, but then you're also planting trees outside the game. And I think if like I said, if the company's backing up what they're trying to push to their players, like that is a really nice like marriage and combination. And then, I mean, we did have a lot of responses to the survey as well, like just getting people to let you know how they feel and think about things. I think like that in itself is really powerful, especially when it comes to these topics, because the more that you understand about how people approach this stuff or think about this stuff, or whether their friends think about it, then the more easily you can, like I said, tailor the message and try to reach them. So I think it's trying to like meet people where they're at, and then creating content that will suit that.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. I think that is probably all we have time for. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Deborah. That was brilliant. It was really, really insightful. Thank you, everyone, for watching on stream and for your questions. We've popped a couple of links into the chat there, so you can find out more about Space Ape, the jam from last year and this year. And if you have any more questions for them, we'll have some links to Twitter, and if you want to discuss it on our community forum, that's there also. But for now, we'll probably sign off. If you're not evented out by now, we have one more for this evening. At 8 o'clock, we'll be joined by Danny Hawk, who'll be discussing folk games and how they've been collected through TikTok with festival director Sebastian Quack. So for now, thank you both Nick and Deborah for this wonderful talk, and thanks everyone for watching. We will see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Cheerio. Thanks.